Do you ever think that a free meal could change a life? How can such a small gesture, yet so meaningful, make such a huge difference? In today's story, we're going to share with you a simple act of kindness. But one that leads to changes you might never expect. Don't miss out, because sometimes, the smallest things hold the greatest power. Join us to discover this touching story about kindness, sacrifice, and the miracles it brings. Be sure to watch until the end so you don't miss any important message. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to help us spread kindness to the world. Sarah Thompson, 30 years old, is a waitress at Stumptown Diner, a quaint little restaurant nestled between an old hardware store and a laundromat that always smells of soap. It's like a temporary refuge tucked away in the peaceful countryside of Oregon. Each day, Sarah's life follows a smooth, rhythmic flow, much like the turning of windmill blades in ancient stories. Every morning, she wakes up before dawn, the faint morning light pulling her from her lonely sleep. She walks 3 blocks to the diner, tying her faded green apron around her waist and greeting the regular customers with a smile, even though that smile often hides the deep loneliness in her heart. Sarah lives alone in a 1-bedroom apartment above the pharmacy, where she can hear the steady beep of the cash register below. The only family photos she has, though yellowed with time, remain as the last memories of her family. Her father passed away when she was just 16, leaving a void in Sarah's heart that would never fully heal. 2 years later, her mother, who had raised her, moved to Arizona for treatment for arthritis, leaving Sarah alone with only holiday phone calls and the occasional letter that would show up on the first Tuesday of October. For the first time, Sarah noticed the boy. He couldn't have been older than 10, smaller than other children his age. With cautious eyes that seemed to absorb everything around him without giving anything away, he sat in the far corner of the diner. A backpack far too large for his thin frame rested beside him, and on the table, there was always an open book. The boy would only order a glass of water. Just a glass of water. No additional requests. Every day, just like that. Sarah, with a friendly smile, would bring the water to him, along with a paper straw. He'd thank her with a subtle nod that was barely noticeable. No words, no sound. It seemed as though the boy kept an invisible distance, a silent wall that no one could breach. On the second day, then the third, and even a week later, Sarah noticed his routine. Precisely at 7:15 a.m., before school started, he would sit there, read his book, and drink water. Every day, it was the same. At 7:55 a.m., he would close the book, thank Sarah, and leave without ever eating anything. On the 15th day, Sarah accidentally brought him a plate of pancakes, as though it were a mistake from the kitchen. "Oh, sorry," she said, placing the pancakes on the table as though it were a completely normal action. "The kitchen made an extra one. I'll leave it here rather than throw it away." The boy looked up at her, his eyes filled with doubt and hunger. But Sarah just smiled, "It's okay, sometimes the kitchen mixes up orders. Eat it, don't let it go to waste." She walked away before he could say anything, watching from afar as he hesitated, then slowly picked up the fork. When Sarah returned 10 minutes later, the plate was empty. The boy continued to immerse himself in his book, as if the food was just part of the silent ritual they had shared over the days. Weeks passed, and Sarah became familiar with the boy's routine, knowing that he never asked for anything, never initiated a conversation. But when Sarah accidentally brought the wrong dish, when the cook made extra pancakes or fried eggs, the boy always ate quickly, almost as if he feared the food would disappear before he could enjoy it. A simple breakfast, yet a small joy in the boy's otherwise grim world. Jack, a retired mailman, was Sarah's close friend. Every morning, he sat in the same seat, sipping his coffee and listening to Sarah's stories. One day, he asked, "Have you ever met his parents?" Sarah shook her head, sadly admitting that she knew nothing about the boy. But Jack just sighed and then asked, "He's really hungry, isn't he?" Linda, a worker at the bakery, cornered Sarah after the third week and said the boy was feeding a stray dog. She wasn't being cruel but, with the practicality of someone who had seen good intentions go awry, she added that the boy kept giving, but never learned to receive. One day, it'll stop, Linda said, like everything else in life. Sarah just shrugged and smiled, it's okay, I was hungry once too. But no matter what, Sarah continued to serve the boy every morning. She never asked anything more, never questioned or tried to understand. She simply made sure his water glass was always full and his pancakes were warm. She didn't dwell on why he always sat alone, why hunger seemed like his constant companion. She just knew that every morning, his presence was a part of her world, small but meaningful. In the 6th week, others began to notice Sarah's strange routine with the boy. They didn't say anything, but they couldn't stop watching. Thus, they became accidental spectators of a quiet play, with the main characters being a waitress and a poor boy. Most people remained silent, but some, especially those who had long forgotten the true meaning of helping others, couldn't help but comment on their observations. This story spread, like autumn rain falling from a window, with harsh words falling but changing nothing. A businessman who frequented Sarah's diner couldn't hide his discomfort when seeing this scene. "Kids these days expect handouts everywhere," he said, his tone mocking. "The times have changed." Another acquaintance couldn't hold back. "Nowadays, no one gives out free food just because someone looks sad." Sarah only listened to these words, letting them pass like rain falling from a window, without responding or arguing. She had learned long ago that protecting kindness wasn't always easy. Sometimes, kindness was misunderstood, but Sarah knew there was no need to explain or justify it. She had accepted this from a young age. Kindness often gets hardened by hearts too used to criticism. However, David, the diner manager, was not someone who could be easily ignored. He called Sarah into the small office behind the kitchen one morning, while everything was still suffused with the breath of the night before. His serious expression was clear beneath his furrowed brow, sweat beads still on his forehead. "I've been watching you with that boy," he said, his voice cold like a sharp knife. His finger tapped lightly on the plywood table, a regular tap, tap echoing like a silent melody in the quiet kitchen. "You can't have employees giving out free meals. It's bad for business and sets a precedent." Sarah twisted the apron in her hands, her gaze downcast, her eyes betraying her anxiety. "I understand," she replied softly. "I'll pay for it myself." David's eyebrows raised, looking at her as if she had just said something strange. "That amount barely covers my rent," he said, with a hint of hesitation in his voice. "It's my choice," Sarah responded firmly, her voice unwavering. She looked into David's eyes, trying to convey certainty in every word. This made him pause, studying her carefully. A small meal each day, to her, was something essential. It was how she felt she was doing something meaningful. After a long sigh, David lowered his hand. "All right, but if it affects your work, or if that boy causes any trouble, it stops immediately." Sarah nodded lightly, a sense of relief flooding through her. Finally, she could continue doing what she had been without the fear of losing her job. Each morning after that, Sarah continued with her work, using part of her tips to buy a new winter coat, or to cover a dentist appointment she had postponed several times, but the boy's breakfast remained a priority. One particularly cold November day, Sarah prepared the usual pancakes, but when the time came, the boy did not show up. She felt uneasy, checking the window every few minutes, her eyes searching for his familiar figure outside. But no one came. At closing time, Linda, a worker at the bakery, walked by and shook her head. "Another day," she muttered. "That plate hasn't been touched. Didn't you give him free food?" Sarah felt her heart tighten. She wrapped the cold pancakes up and took them home, unable to throw them away. After all, those pancakes were part of a routine, a connection she had started to build. The boy didn't show up the next day, nor the day after, and it seemed as if he had disappeared from the world. A week passed without a trace of him, and Sarah began to wonder if Linda was right. Could the boy have simply moved away, like a lost soul with no clear reason. In the quiet nights, Sarah wondered if she was doing something foolish by helping someone she knew nothing about. She opened a small wooden box where she kept her most cherished belongings. Inside was a faded photograph of her father in military uniform, his gentle smile despite the hardships of war. Beside it was the small leather journal he had carried with him during his service. The pages were worn from being held too many times, but it still kept a memory of the kindness her father had taught her. Sarah ran her fingers over the worn pages, reading the lines she had memorized long ago. Share half your meal with a local boy. Johnson said I was crazy for doing it, but the look in his eyes when he ate was just like mine when my mother gave me her last piece of bread in difficult times. No one becomes poor from sharing half a loaf of bread. But those who forget to share will remain hungry forever. Those words were a reminder of why she did this. An unexpected clarity washed over her, and she realized that it didn't matter what the boy's name was or what his story was. But her actions would change something in someone's life. Hunger, whether physical or emotional, always comes with a simple need. Not questions, but sharing. And even if the boy never came back, each morning there was someone who wasn't hungry anymore. She believed that small actions could change someone's life, as long as they still believed in hope. With these thoughts in her mind, Sarah smiled, as if she had figured it all out. On the morning the boy missed his 23rd day, Sarah arrived at the diner with a strange feeling. At 7:15 a.m., her gaze still drifted toward the door. As if it were a habit that had become a part of her. A habit that couldn't be shaken off. But her anticipation, sharp as a knife, had softened into a quiet sense of resignation. She went about her work, with familiar motions. Preparing a small plate of pancakes in case the boy would show. Placing it at his usual booth. Where everything remained the same. Except for the absence of a familiar figure. 9:17 a.m. The diner suddenly fell silent. An overwhelming stillness enveloping the restaurant. Where the chatter and laughter of customers had turned into vague whispers. Sarah was pouring coffee at a booth near the window when, suddenly, she glanced outside and saw 4 black SUVs with government plates. Pulling into the small parking lot. They moved with such precision that it could have been choreographed. Forming a crescent shape in front of the entrance. Fork stopped midair. The eyes of customers shifting from their food to the luxury cars. Pedestrians slowed down, their eyes full of surprise and confusion. Immediately, men in uniform stepped out of the SUVs. Standing rigidly beside each car door. Sarah could clearly sense the shift in the atmosphere. One man, in the uniform of a senior military officer, looked across the diner's facade. His stern face reflecting the sadness and hardships of war. Before walking deliberately toward the entrance with a firm resolve. The doorbell rang as they entered. The sound so loud that it seemed to freeze the air around them. The diner was so quiet that Sarah could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. David, the diner manager, stepped out from the office behind, adjusting his tie nervously. "Can I help you gentlemen?" he asked, his voice higher than usual. This scene made Sarah feel strangely distant. As if everything had changed in an instant. The senior officer, in full uniform and looking very serious, removed his hat and replied. "I'm looking for a person who works here, a woman named Sarah." All eyes in the diner turned toward Sarah. She felt each step she took, slowly approaching them. The coffee pot still in her hand. Though there were waves of anxiety inside her. Sarah tried to keep her voice calm. "I'm Sarah." She said this, her hands trembling, betraying the rising worry in her heart. "My name is Colonel Michael Brown, U.S. Army Special Forces Command," he said. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a neatly presented envelope. "I'm here because of a promise to one of my soldiers." He extended the envelope toward her, and with a slow, deliberate movement, he continued. "This is a letter from the commanding general of the Special Forces." Sarah looked up at the letter, sensing something unusual. Andrew, she repeated the name she didn't recognize, but one that felt strangely familiar. The boy you've been helping for several months, Colonel Michael continued. Andrew Wilson, his father is Sergeant Wilson, one of my best soldiers. The weight of his words hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. And she felt an overwhelming sense of disbelief. Is Andrew okay? Is he safe? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. But her eyes still fixed on the letter, hoping to find answers to all the unspoken questions. Colonel Michael looked at her with a somber expression and explained. He's currently staying with his grandparents in Colorado. The pieces of the story started to fall into place. And Sarah suddenly realized the depth of the boy's loneliness. His careful observation, and his hunger, which seemed to be not just a material need, but a deep, invisible emptiness. The boy had been too proud to share his pain. Too afraid of being exposed, unable to take care of himself. His father was killed in Afghanistan 2 months ago, Colonel Michael said, his voice low, but not lacking emotion. And in his final letter, he wrote that if anything happened to him, we should thank the woman named Sarah who fed Andrew breakfast without asking. The diner fell into stunned silence. Sarah's heart tightened as she imagined Andrew, now with a name and a story. Yet left to survive alone, waiting for a father who would never return. Colonel Michael opened the envelope and pulled out a faded sheet of paper. Handwritten words from a father about to depart. If I don't make it back, please find the woman who fed my son breakfast. Andrew mentioned her in the letters he sent to me. He said she never asked why he was alone, or made him feel ashamed. She just fed him day after day without expecting anything in return. Tears began to roll down Sarah's face. She couldn't stop them. Colonel Michael's voice seemed to come from a faraway place. Bearing food to a hungry child is not just about giving them food. You preserve the dignity of a soldier's son. Sarah took the letter with trembling hands, the tears clouding her vision. Colonel Michael's words felt like a final salute from fallen soldiers. An invaluable thank you that she would always remember. She could only stand in silence, unsure of what to say. Because what she had done, though small, had brought immense meaning to someone's life. When Colonel Michael stood up that morning, everyone in the diner fell into complete silence. It wasn't just because of his presence, but because of a rising feeling in the air. The customers who had once mocked Sarah's actions, those who had made comments about giving without reason, now sat motionless, their faces showing shock and, in some cases, shame. How many times had they looked at her with contempt, with whispers about her small acts? But now, they realized that what they had once considered insignificant held far more meaning than anything they could have imagined. Colonel Michael stood tall, solemn, and saluted in military fashion. A gesture of deep respect that few could extend to ordinary citizens. Behind him, all the soldiers present did the same, bowing their heads and clapping in unison. This moment wasn't just because they were standing in a shabby diner in a small town, but to express gratitude toward the woman who had done something simple. Fed a hungry child without asking why. On behalf of the U.S. Army Special Forces, Colonel Michael began, his voice strong but emotional. And on behalf of the brothers in arms of Sergeant Thompson, as well as for Andrew, I want to thank Sarah. Sarah stood frozen, her eyes wide with surprise, her mind spinning with the words just spoken. Pancakes, fried eggs, a glass of milk, and a smile without questions. All those small things in her daily life meant so much to a boy living in unimaginable circumstances. And more importantly, that act had touched the heart of a father fighting his final battles far from home. She didn't know what to do. Just standing there, overwhelmed, feeling every word in the thank you from Colonel Michael. She looked at the soldiers standing at attention, their eyes glinting with respect she never thought she would receive. Her hands trembled, but as Colonel Michael nodded and continued, His voice soft, almost like a simple explanation. Sometimes, that's enough. Sometimes, just feeding a hungry child without asking why is the greatest act of kindness. His words weren't just a recognition of Sarah, but a deep understanding of true kindness. Without judgment, without expectation. The entire diner was now silent, suffocatingly so. The customers remained seated in quiet reverence. A wave of respect swelling within them. A feeling they hadn't felt in a long time. Everyone, from the regulars to the newcomers, felt that something important had just happened in this small space. Sarah, a waitress who had lived almost invisibly for years, now stood at the center of it all, holding the final letter from a father. A father she never knew, but who now felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She realized that not every act of kindness is immediately recognized. But what mattered was that what she had done, no matter how small, how simple, had not only protected the health of a child, but also preserved the honor and peace of mind of a soldier in his final days. The week after, Colonel Michael's visit transformed Stumptown Diner in ways no one could predict. The story of Sarah's kindness spread throughout the town, like a fire catching in a strong wind. From conversations in the diner to social media. The same Facebook group that had once mocked her actions now shared the heartfelt story of Sergeant Thompson's letter. The thank yous began flooding in, thousands of shares and supportive comments pouring in. Frequent customers started requesting Sarah's special dish. A meal specifically for them, but also as a gesture of thanks. The thank yous were not just because they were reminded of what mattered in life, but because Sarah's kindness gave them hope for better things. A small American flag was hung next to the booth where Andrew used to sit. A reminder of a story that anyone could forget, but would never be forgotten by those who recognized the value of kindness. In a collage of gratitude, there were coins, unit patches, small, meaningful mementos that found their place on a small bulletin board behind the counter. Sarah had become part of that collage. A part of a much larger story than any pancakes she had made. On the 7th day, a manila envelope arrived, addressed to Sarah. Inside was a handwritten letter, carefully arranged on lined paper, reflecting the youth of its author. Dear Sarah, the letter began. Until that day, I didn't know your name. But every morning during those months, you were the only one who looked at me like I wasn't invisible or broken. My dad always told me that real heroes don't wear capes. They wear uniforms. But I think sometimes they wear aprons too. Those moving words carved deep into Sarah's heart. And she couldn't stop smiling. She hadn't just fed Andrew. She had given him something more important, respect, compassion, and a space to exist without needing to explain himself. With the letters, the thank yous, and the mementos, Sarah realized that sometimes, the smallest actions, seemingly insignificant, could change a life. And she, the unnamed waitress, had written a story of kindness, of unconditional generosity, that would forever be remembered. 3 months after Colonel Michael's emotional visit, Stumptown Diner had slowly returned to its normal rhythm. But everything had changed in a way no one could have predicted. On a warm summer day, a group of schoolchildren came to the diner after a field trip. The little kids, their eyes bright with curiosity, sat at the tables. One of them an 8-year-old girl with eyes that seemed to hold the whole world within them. She observed Sarah, gently pouring water into glasses, as if trying to uncover some kind of secret. After a moment, the girl spoke up with a simple statement, as though it were the most natural thing. My dad says you're a hero. Sarah stopped in her tracks, a sip of water caught in her throat. She smiled gently, trying to maintain her composure. She kneeled down to meet the girl's eyes, looking into those curious eyes, and then spoke. No, sweetie, I'm just someone who understands what it's like to be hungry. Not just hungry for food. The girl looked up at her, as if not fully understanding the meaning of Sarah's words. But then her teacher, sitting next to her, added a thoughtful comment. Hunger takes many forms, and food is just the most obvious one. The teacher's words seemed like a deep explanation for the children sitting around. And for Sarah as well, a lesson about life. One that not everyone could understand right away. Sarah looked at the teacher, nodding gently, smiling in her heart because she knew that there are truths in life that don't need to be spoken, just understood with a look. Hunger takes many forms, Sarah reminded herself. Thinking back on the days when she realized she wasn't just feeding Andrew, but giving him respect and a piece of the love he needed. With summer approaching, Stumptown Diner organized a fundraiser for military families. Those who had to be away serving in the military. One day, David, the manager of the diner, with a surprised look on his face, stood across from Sarah and admitted that she had changed something in him. I never understood why my dad was so determined to feed all the stray kids in the neighborhood. David began, his gaze dropping as if searching for an explanation for something he didn't fully understand. It drove my mom crazy, but now I think I get it. Sometimes a meal is more than just food. Sarah stood still, saying nothing. Just smiling while thinking about the simple things she had done over time. A breakfast that never lacked pancakes, eggs, a glass of milk, and a smile. Just that, yet it had the power to change not only a boy's life, but even the hearts of those who seemed hardened. Then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, nearly a year after Andrew first walked into the diner, Sarah went to work as usual, but that day, something was different. She noticed something small and metallic lying at her usual spot. A challenge coin, a special item typically only given to military personnel in their unit. The coin was engraved with the Special Forces insignia. And on the other side, it read, Semper Memor, always remember. Sarah looked around the diner, seeing no one, and stepped outside, feeling a strange sensation as the town was waking up. The familiar sounds like the sprinkler on the grass or the distant rumble of the school bus making its first rounds. But there was no strange car parked nearby, no one had left any trace. Only her, with the coin in her hand. Feeling like it was a reminder of life, a comfort that small actions, though not expected in return, sometimes get repaid in unexpected ways. Sarah slipped the coin into her pocket, feeling its weight. It was a symbol of gratitude. A reminder of kindness given without expectation. She walked home, in the fading light of the evening. And when she hung up her apron before heading out, her eyes landed on a new sign hung in the diner window. No matter who you are, or how much you can pay, no one will go hungry. David, seeing her look at the sign, simply shrugged in a self-aware way. New policy, he said with a small smile. No grand speeches, no public declarations. Just a quiet commitment, simple but powerful. To see the hunger in others and respond with what is truly needed, food. Without judgment, kindness without questioning. Sarah smiled, understanding the unspoken acknowledgement in David's gesture. She stepped outside, the coin still in her pocket. A solid presence she knew would follow her for the rest of her life. She thought of Andrew, now growing up with his grandparents in Colorado, carrying the memory of his beloved father and the unforgettable days they shared. With those thoughts, Sarah knew that her kindness, though small, would always exist in the darkest moments of someone's life. She also knew that not everyone who helps needs to be recognized. Some people just need to know that today someone isn't hungry, and that's what can change a life. And even though people might forget this story in a few days, if no one tells it again, history will remain silent. It is stories like this, about kindness, justice, and the preservation of memory, that will be kept alive until the very last moment. Sarah gently pushed the plate of pancakes toward the boy, whispering, as always, "Sweetie, no charge." She never asked for his name, never expected anything in return. Just a simple act, but it changed the world of one person. The story of Sarah and her small, meaningful actions has come to an end. But the message of kindness lives on. Kind gestures, no matter how simple, can change a life. You can be the one to change the world, starting with simple acts every day. Remember, in difficult moments, kindness is the light that guides us through it all. If you feel this story has touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel, so you don't miss more meaningful stories. Share your thoughts and leave an encouraging word in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Let's spread kindness together and create positive change in everyday life. Thank you for watching and supporting the channel.